Tu vas dire quoi?
Alright. So something happened there with the live stream. I'm not sure. But I'll start again then. The Minpins. Little Billy's mother was always telling him what to do, what he was allowed to do and what he was not allowed to do. All the things he was allowed to do were boring. All the things he was not allowed to do were exciting. One of the things he was never allowed to do, the most exciting of them all, was to go out through the garden gate all by himself and explore the world beyond. On this sunny summer afternoon, little Billy was kneeling on a chair in the living room, gazing out through the window at the wonderful world beyond. His mother was in the kitchen, doing the ironing, and although the door was open, she couldn't see him. Every now and again, his mother would call out to him, saying, "Little Billy, what are you up to in there?" And little Billy would always call back and say, "I'm being good, Mummy." But little Billy was awfully tired of being good. Through the window, not so very far away, he could see the big, black, secret wood that was called the Forest of Sin. It was something he had always longed to explore. His mother had told him that even grown-ups were afraid of going into the Forest of Sin. She recited a poem to him that was well known in the district. It went like this: "Beware, beware the forest of sin. None come out, but many go in." "Why don't they come out?" little Billy asked her. "What happens to them in the wood?" "That wood," his mother said, "is full of the most bloodthirsty wild beasts in the world." "You mean tigers and lions?" little Billy asked. "Much worse than that," his mother said. "What's worse than tigers and lions, Mummy?" "Wangdoodles are worse," his mother said, "and hornswogglers, and snozwanglers, and vermicious nids. And worst of them all is the terrible, blood-suckling, tooth-pluckling, stone-chuckling Spittler. There's one of them in there, too." "A Spittler, Mummy?" "Of course. And when the Spittler chases after you, he blows clouds of hot smoke out of his nose." "Would he eat me up?" little Billy asked. "In one gulp," his mother said. Little Billy did not believe a word of this. He guessed his mother was just making it all up just to frighten him and to stop him ever going out of the house alone. And now, little Billy was kneeling on the chair, gazing with longing through the window at the famous Forest of Sin. "Little Billy," his mother called out from the kitchen, "what are you doing?" "I'm being good, Mummy," little Billy called back. Just then, a funny thing happened. Little Billy began to hear somebody whispering in his ear. He knew exactly who it was. It was the devil. The voice always started whispering to him when he was especially bored. "It would be easy," the voice was whispering, "to climb out through that window. No one would ever see you, and in a jiffy, you would be in the garden. And in another jiffy, you would be through the front gate. And yet another jiffy, you would be exploring the marvelous Forest of Sin all by yourself. It is a super place. Do not believe one word of what your mother says about wangdoodles and hornsnogglers and snozwanglers and vermicious nids and terrible blood-suckling, tooth-pluckling, stone-chuckling Spittler. There are no such things. What is in there? Little Billy whispered. Wild strawberries, the devil whispered back. The whole floor of the forest is carpeted with wild strawberries, every one of them luscious and red and juicy ripe. Go and see for yourself. These were the words the devil whispered softly into little Billy's ear on that sunny summer afternoon. The next moment, little Billy had opened the window and was climbing out. In a jiffy, he had dropped silently on to the flower bed below. In another jiffy, he was out through the garden gate. And yet, another jiffy, he was standing on the very edge of the great big dark forest of sin. He had made it. He had got there, and now the forest was all his to explore. Was he nervous? What? Who said anything about being nervous? Hornswogglers? Vermicious nids? What sort of rubbish was that? Little Billy hesitated. I'm not nervous, he said. I'm not in the least bit nervous, not me. Very, very slowly, he walked forward into the great forest. Giant trees were soon surrounding him on all sides, and their branches made an almost solid roof high above his head, blotting out the sky. Here and there, little shafts of sunlight shone through gaps in the roof. There was not a sound anywhere. It was like being among the dead men in an enormous, empty green cathedral. When he had ventured some distance into the forest, little Billy stopped and stood quite still, listening. He could hear nothing. Nothing at all. It was absolute silence. Or was there? Hold on just 1 second. What was that? Little Billy flicked his head around and stared into the everlasting gloom and doom of the forest. There it was again. There was no mistaking it this time. From far away, there came a very faint, whoozing, whistling noise, like a small, gusty wind blowing through the trees. Then it grew louder. Every second it was growing louder, and suddenly it was no longer a small wind. It was a fearsome, swooshing, whooshing, whiffling, snorting noise that sounded as though some gigantic creature was breathing heavily through its nose as it galloped towards him. Little Billy turned and ran. Little Billy ran faster than he had ever run in his life before, but the swooshing, whooshing, whiffling, snorting noise was coming after him. Worse still, it was getting louder. This meant that the thing, the maker of the noise, the galloping creature, was getting closer. It was catching up to him. Run, little Billy, run, run, run! He dodged around massive trees. He skipped over roots and brambles. He bent low to flash under boughs and bushes. He had wings on his feet, he ran so fast. But still, the fearsome, swooshing, whooshing, whiffling, snorting noise grew louder and louder as it came closer and closer. Little Billy glanced back quickly over his shoulder, and now, in the distance, he saw a sight that froze his blood and made icicles in his veins. What he saw were two mighty puffs of orange-red smoke, billowing and rolling through the trees in his direction. These were followed by two more whoosh, whoosh, and then two more whoosh, whoosh, and they must surely be coming, Billy told himself, from the two nose holes of some galloping, panting beast that had smelled him out and was coming after him. His mother words began thrumming once again in his head. Beware, beware, the forest of sin. None come out, but many go in. It's the Spittler for sure, little Billy cried out. Mummy said the Spittler blows smoke when it chases you. This one is blowing smoke. It's the terrible blood-suckling, tooth-pluckling, stone-chuckling Spittler. And soon it will catch me up and I'll be blood-suckled and tooth-pluckled and stone-chuckled and chewed up into tiny pieces. And then the spitler will spit me out in a cloud of smoke, and that will be the end of me. Little Billy was running with the speed of an arrow, but each time he glanced back over his shoulder, the puffs of orange-red, smoky breath had gotten closer. They were so close now, he could feel the wind of them on the back of his neck, and the noise, it was deafening in his ears, and fearsome, swooshing, whooshing, whiffling, panting noise. Wumph, wumph, it went. Wumph, 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 wumph. It was like the noise made by a steam locomotive pulling out from a station. Then suddenly he heard another noise that was somehow more fearsome still. It was the pounding of gigantic galloping hooves on the floor of the forest. He glanced round again, but the thing, the beast, the monster, or whatever it was hidden from his sight by the smoke it shut out as it galloped forward. The smoky breath was billowing all around him now. He could feel its hotness. "Mummy," he cried out, "save me!" Suddenly, directly in front of him, little Billy saw the trunk of an enormous tree. This tree was different from the others because it had branches hanging down very low. While still running, he made a frantic jump for its lowest branch. He caught it and pulled himself up. Then he grabbed the next branch above his head and pulled himself up again. Then again and again, climbing higher and higher to get away from the terrible, snorting, smoke-blowing, smelly beast down below. He stopped climbing only when he was too exhausted to climb any higher. He looked up, but even now he couldn't see the top of the giant tree. It seemed to go on forever. He looked down. He couldn't see the ground either. He was in a world of green leaves and thick, smooth branches, with no earth or sky in sight. The snorting, smelly, smoke-blowing beast was miles away down below somewhere. He couldn't even hear it anymore. Little Billy found a comfortable place where two big branches came together, and he sat down to rest. For the moment, at any rate, he was safe. Then something very peculiar happened. There was a huge smooth branch very close to where little Billy was sitting, and he suddenly noticed that a small square patch of bark on this branch was beginning to move. It was a very small patch, about the size of a postage stamp, and the two sides of it seemed to be splitting down the middle and opening slowly outwards, like a pair of shutters on some tiny window. Little Billy sat staring at this extraordinary thing, and all at once, a strange, uncomfortable feeling came over him. It felt as though the tree he was sitting in and the green leaves all around him belonged to another world altogether, and that he was a trespasser who had no right to be where he was. He watched intently as the tiny shutters of tree bark opened wider and wider, and when they were fully opened, they revealed a small squarish window set neatly in the curve of the big branch. There was some sort of yellowish glow coming from deep in the man with white hair. Little Billy could see that this clearly, despite the fact that the whole of the tiny man's head was no larger than a pea. This ancient miniature face was staring straight at little Billy with the most severe expression on it. The skin of the face was deeply wrinkled all over, but the eyes were as bright as two stars. Now something even more peculiar began to happen. All around him, not only on the huge main trunk of the tree, but also on all the big branches that grew out of it, other tiny windows were opening and tiny faces were peering out. Some of these faces belonged to men and others were clearly women. Here and there, the head of a child was seen peering over a windowsill. The heads of the children were no larger than the heads of matchsticks. In the end, there must have been more than 20 small windows all around where little Billy was sitting, and from each window, these amazing little faces were peering out. No sound came from any of the watchers. The faces were silent, unmoving, almost ghost-like. Now the tiny old man in the window nearest to Billy seemed to be saying something, but his voice was so soft and whispery, little Billy had to lean right up close to catch his words. "You're in a bit of a twizzler, aren't you?" the voice was saying. "You can't go down again because if you do, you'll be guzzled up at once. But you can't possibly sit up here forever either." I know, little Billy gasped. "Don't shout," the tiny man said. "I'm not shouting," little Billy said. "Talk softer," the tiny man said. "If you talk too loud, your voice will blow me away." But but who are you?" little Billy asked, taking care to speak very softly this time. "We are the Minpins," the tiny man said, "and we own this wood. I shall come closer, then you will hear me better." The old Minpin climbed out of his window and walked straight down the big, steeply sloping branch, then up another branch until he found a place only a few inches from little Billy's face. It was amazing to see him walking up and down these almost vertical branches without the slightest trouble. It was like seeing someone walking up and down a wall. "How on earth do you do that?" little Billy asked. "Suction boots," the Minpin said. "We all wear them. You can't live in trees without suction boots." On his feet, he was wearing tiny green boots, rather like miniature wellies. His clothes were curiously old-fashioned, mostly brown and black, the sort of thing people wore 200 or 300 years ago. Suddenly, all the other Minpins, men, women, and children, were climbing out of their windows and making their way towards little Billy. Their suction boots seemed to allow them to walk up and down the steepest branches with the greatest ease, and some were even walking upside down underneath the branches. All of them were wearing these old-fashioned clothes from hundreds of years ago, and several had on very peculiar hats and bonnets. They stood or sat in groups on all the branches around little Billy, staring at him as though he were someone from outer space. "But do all of you actually live inside this tree?" little Billy asked. The old Minpin said, "All the trees in this forest are hollow, not just this one, but all of them. And inside them, thousands and thousands of Minpins are living. These great trees are filled with rooms and staircases, not just in the big main trunk, but in most of the other branches as well. This is a Minpin forest, and it's not the only one in England." "Could I peep inside?" little Billy said. Of course," the old Minpin said. "Put your eye close to that window." He pointed to the one he had just come out of. Little Billy shifted his position and placed one eye right up against a square hole that was no bigger than a postage stamp. What he saw now was quite marvelous. He saw a room that was lit by a pale yellow light of some sort, and it was furnished with beautifully made miniature chairs and a table. To one side was a four-poster bed. It was like one of those rooms little Billy had once seen in the Queen's doll's house at Windsor Castle. "It's beautiful," little Billy said. "Are they all as lovely as this one?" "Most are smaller," the old Minpin said. "This one is very grand because I am the ruler of this tree. My name is Don Minnie. What is yours?" "Mine is Little Billy," little Billy said. Greetings, little Billy, Don Minnie said. You're welcome to look into some of the other rooms if you wish. We are very proud of them. All the other Minpin families wanted to show little Billy their own rooms. They rushed about along the branches calling out, Come and see mine! Come, please, see mine! Little Billy began climbing about and peeping into the tiny windows. Through one window he saw a bathroom, just like his own at home, only 1,000 times smaller. And through another he saw a classroom with lots of tiny desks and a blackboard at one end. In every room there was a stairway in one corner leading up to the room above. As little Billy went from window to window, the Minpins followed him, clustering round and smiling at his exclamations of wonder. They're all absolutely marvelous, he said. They're much nicer than our rooms at home. When the sightseeing tour was over, little Billy sat down again on a large branch and said to the whole company of Minpins, Look, I've had a lovely time with you all, but how am I ever going to get home again? My mother will be going crazy. You can never get down from this tree, Don Minnie said. I've told you that. If you're stupid enough to try, you'll be eaten up in 5 seconds. Is it the Spittler? Little Billy asked. Is it the terrible blood-suckling, tooth-plucking, stone-chuckling Spittler? I've never heard of any Spittler, Don Minnie said. The one waiting for you down there is the fearsome gruncher, the red-hot, smoke-belching gruncher. He grunches up everything in the forest. That's why we have to live up here. He has grunched up hundreds of humans and literally millions of Minpins. What makes him so dangerous is his amazing and magical nose. His nose can smell out a human or a Minpin or any other animal from 10 miles away. Then he gallops towards it at terrific speed. He can never see anything in front of him because of all the smoke he belches out of his nose and mouth. But that doesn't bother him. His nose tells him exactly where to go. Why does he blow out all that smoke? Little Billy asked. Because he's got a red-hot fire in his belly, Don Minnie said. The gruncher likes his meat roasted, and the fire roasted as it goes down. Look, Little Billy said, Gruncher or no gruncher, I've simply got to get home somehow. I'll have to make a dash for it. Don't try it, I beg you, Don Minnie said. The gruncher knows you're up here. He's waiting there now for you. Climb down a bit with me and I'll show you. Don Minnie walked easily, straight down the side of the great tree trunk. Little Billy climbed carefully down after him from one branch to the next. Soon, below them, they began to smell the revolting hot stench of the gruncher's breath, and the orange-red smoke was now billowing up into the lower branches in thick clouds. What does he look like? Little Billy whispered. Nobody knows, Don Minnie answered. He makes so much steam and smoke you can never see him. If you are behind him, you can sometimes catch a glimpse of little bits of him, because all the smoke is being blown out in the front. Some Minpins say they have seen his back legs, huge and black and very hairy, shaped like lion's legs, but 10 times as big. And it is rumored that his head is like an enormous crocodile's head, with rows and rows and rows of sharp pointed teeth. But nobody really knows. Mind you, he must have a gigantic nose holes to be able to blow out all of that smoke. They stayed still listening, and they could hear the gruncher pawing the ground at the base of the tree with his giant hoofs and snorting with greed. He smells you, Don Minnie said. He knows you are not far away. He'll wait forever to get you now. He adores humans and he doesn't catch them very often. Humans are like strawberries and cream to him. You see, for months he's been living on a diet of Minpins. And 1,000 Minpins is not even a snack for him. The brute is ravenous. Little Billy and Don Minnie climbed back up the tree to where all the other Minpins were gathered. They seemed glad to see little Billy come safely back. "Stay up here with us," they said to him. "We'll look after you." Just then, a lovely blue swallow alighted on a branch not far away, and little Billy saw a mother Minpin and her two children climb quite casually on to the bird's back. Then the bird took off and flew away with its passengers seated comfortably between its wings. "Good heavens!" cried little Billy. "Is that a special tame bird?" "Not at all," Don Minnie said. "We know all the birds. The birds are our friends. We use them all the time for going places. That lady is taking her children to see their grandmother, who lives in another forest about 50 miles away. They'll be there in less than an hour." "Can you talk to them?" little Billy asked. "To the birds, I mean?" I believe what he was seeing fire inside him, very low, hot foot, and in a kind of gently down. For a brief moment, smoke belching gruncher made the lake boil and smoke like a volcano. Then the fire went out, and the awesome beast disappeared under the waves. When it was all over, Swan and little Billy flew higher and circled the lake for a last look. It had one or more Minpins on its back. Little Billy recognized Don Minnie riding on a fine jay, and he was waving and cheering. It seemed that all the other Minpins from the big tree had turned up as well to witness the great victory over the dreaded gruncher. Every kind of bird was circling around little Billy and Swan, and the Minpins on their backs were waving and clapping and shouting with joy. Little Billy waved back and laughed and thought how wonderful it all was. Then, led by Swan, all the birds and the Minpins returned to the home tree. Back in the tree, there was a tremendous celebration for little Billy's victory over the dreaded gruncher. Minpins from all over the forest had flown in on their birds to cheer the young hero, and all the branches and twigs of the great tree were crowded with tiny people. When the cheers and the clapping had died down at last, Don Minnie stood up to make a speech. "Minpins of the forest," he cried, raising his small voice so that it could be heard all over the tree. "The murderous gruncher who has gobbled up so many thousands of us Minpins has gone forever. The forest floor is safe at last for us to walk on. So now we can all go down to pick blackberries and winkleberries and puckleberries and muckleberries and twinkleberries and snozberries to our heart's content. And our children can play among the wild flowers and the roots all day long." Don Minnie paused and turned his eyes upon little Billy, who was sitting on a branch not far away. "But, ladies and gentlemen," he went on, "who is it we have to thank for this great blessing that has come upon us? Who is the savior of the Minpins?" Don Minnie paused again. The Minpins in their thousands sat listening intently. "Our savior," he cried out, "our hero, our wonder boy is, as you already know, our human visitor, little Billy. Hooray for little Billy!" Cheers and shouts came from the crowd. Don Minnie now turned and spoke directly to little Billy. "You, my boy, have done a wonderful thing for us, and in return, we wish to do something for you. I've had a word with Swan, and he has agreed to become your personal, private airplane, for just as long as you remain small enough to fly on his back." "Good old Swan, what a great idea!" More cheers and clapping and shouts came from the crowd. However, Don Minnie continued, still addressing little Billy, You cannot go flying around all over the place on Swan's back in full daylight. Some human would be bound to see you, and then the secret would be out, and you'd be forced to tell your people all about us. That must never happen. If it did, crowds of enormous humans would come clumping all over our beloved forest to look for Minpins, and our quiet homeland would be ruined. I'll never tell a soul, little Billy cried out. Even so, Don Minnie said, we cannot risk you making daylight flights. But every night, after the light in your bedroom has been switched off, Swan will come to your window to see if you'd like a ride. Sometimes he will bring you back here to see us. Other times he will take you to visit places more wonderful than you could ever dream of. Would you like Swan to take you home now? I think we can risk just one more quick daylight flight. Oh my gosh, little Billy cried. I'd clean forgotten about home. Mummy'll be in a panic. I must fly. Don Minnie gave a signal, and in 5 seconds Swan swooped down and landed on the tree. Little Billy climbed onto his back, and as the great swan spread his wings and flew away, the whole forest, not just the tree they were in, but the whole forest from end to end, came alive with the cheering of 1,000,000 Minpins. Swan landed on the lawn of Little Billy's house, and Little Billy jumped off his back and ran to the living room window. Very quietly, he climbed in. The room was empty. Little Billy, came his mother's voice from the kitchen. What are you up to in there? You've been very quiet for a long time. I'm being good, Mummy, Little Billy called back. I'm being very, very good. His mother came into the room with a pile of ironing in her arms. She looked at Little Billy. What have you been doing? She cried. Your clothes are absolutely filthy. I've been climbing trees, Little Billy said. I can't let you out of my sight for 10 minutes, his mother said. Which tree was it? Just one of those old trees outside, Little Billy said. If you're not careful, you'll fall down and break an arm, his mother said, and she walked out of the room with her ironing. From then on, Swan came every night to Little Billy's bedroom window. He came after Billy's mother and father had gone to sleep, and the whole house was quiet. But Little Billy was never asleep. He was always wide awake and eagerly waiting. And every night, before Swan arrived, he saw to it that the curtains were drawn back and the window was open wide so that the great white bird could come gliding right into the window and land on the floor beside his bed. Then Little Billy would slip into his dressing gown and climb onto Swan's back, and off they would go. Oh, it was a wondrous secret life that Little Billy lived up there in the sky at night on Swan's back. They flew in a magical world of silence, swooping and gliding over the dark world below, where all the earthly people were fast asleep in their beds. Once, Swan flew higher than ever before, and they came to an enormous billowing cloud that was shining in a pale golden light. And the folds of this cloud, Little Billy could make out creatures of some sort moving around. Who were they? He wanted so badly to ask Swan this question, but he couldn't speak a word of bird language. Swan seemed unwilling to fly very close to these creatures from another world, and this made it impossible for Little Billy to see them clearly. Another time, Swan flew through the night for what seemed like hours and hours until they came, at last, to a gigantic opening in the earth's surface, and a sort of huge gaping hole in the ground. And Swan glided slowly round and round above this massive crater, and then right down into it. Deeper and deeper they went into the dark hole. Suddenly, there was a brightness like sunlight below them, and Little Billy could see a vast lake of water, gloriously blue, and on the surface of the lake, thousands of swans were swimming slowly about. The pure white of the swans against the blue of the water was very beautiful. Little Billy wondered whether this was a secret meeting place of all the swans in the world, And he wished he had been able to ask Swan this question as well. But sometimes mysteries are more intriguing than explanations, and the swans on the blue lake, like the creatures of the golden cloud, would remain a mystery forever in little Billy's memory. About once a week, Swan would fly little Billy back to the old tree in the forest to visit the Minpins. On one of these visits, Don Minnie said to him, "You're growing up fast, little Billy. I'm afraid that soon you will be too heavy for Swan." "I know," little Billy said. "I can't help it. I'm afraid we don't have any bigger birds than Swan," Don Minnie said. "But when he can't carry you any longer, I do hope you will still come up here to visit us." I will," little Billy cried. "I will always keep coming to see you. I'll never forget you." "And listen," Don Minnie said, smiling, "perhaps some of us might come down in great secrecy to visit you." Could you really do that?" little Billy asked. "I think we might," Don Minnie said. "We could trickle silently down to your house in the dark and creep into your bedroom for a midnight feast." "But how would you get all the way up to my bedroom window?" little Billy asked. "Have you forgotten our suction boots?" Don Minnie said. "We'd simply walk straight up the wall of your house." "How lovely," little Billy cried. "Then we can take in turns visiting each other." "Of course we can," Don Minnie said. And this is exactly what happened. No child has ever had such an exciting young life as little Billy, and no child has ever kept such a huge secret so faithfully. He never told a soul about the Minpins. I myself have been very careful not to tell you where they live, and I am not about to tell you now. But if by some extraordinary chance you should one day wander into a forest and catch a glimpse of a Minpin, then hold your breath and thank your lucky stars, because up to now, so far as I know, no one except little Billy has ever seen one. Watch the birds as they fly above your heads, and who knows, you might well spy a tiny creature riding back high on the back of a swallow or a raven. Watch the robin especially, because it always flies low, and you might see a nervous young minpin perched on the feathers, having its first flying lesson. And above all, watch with glittering eyes the whole world around you, because the greatest secrets are always hidden in the most unlikely places. Those who don't believe in magic will never find them. That's the end of the story for today. I hope you enjoyed it. It's one of my favorites. Thanks a lot for joining me. So starting next week, starting on Monday, I'm going to be doing live streams and posting videos at 2 p.m. instead of 11. So starting Monday, I'll be making these videos at 2. And stay tuned for more stories and different types of stories, like the one that I told you about earlier, about the little boy who sees a little flying man on his roof. Now they become best friends. That story is called Carlson, but that one is for another time. Have a good day.